Questa è la seconda puntata, credo, dei dialoghi sulla democrazia promossa dal nostro Dipartimento e siamo qui per presentare uno studioso di rilievo assolutamente internazionale che ha appena pubblicato un libro molto interessante, molto importante sulla democrazia, Zielonka. Zielonka insegna, spero di non commettere errori, politica e relazioni internazionali all'Università di Venezia Ca' Foscari e anche ad Oxford, credo, e ha insegnato in molte università, ha insegnato a Leida, ha insegnato a Firenze, ha scritto diversi libri importanti, oltre a moltissimi saggi, tra cui Counter Revolution Liberal Europe in Retreat del 2018, no? Sì, che è stato premiato e tradotto in diverse lingue, tra cui in italiano, e Politics and the Media in New Democracies, Europe in a Comparative Perspective, del 2015. Molte sue opere appunto sono state tradotte in italiano, tra cui questo che presentiamo oggi, in particolare Democrazia miope, il tempo, lo spazio e la crisi della politica. Ha collaborato, credo, nel passato, visto quello che dicevamo prima, con diversi quotidiani e mi verrebbe da definirlo uno dei principali intellettuali studiosi europei, in particolare sul tema proprio dell'Europa, della democrazia e della relazione tra democrazia ed Europa. Questo libro, appunto, che tiene insieme, come è nel suo approccio di studi, un approccio di relazioni internazionali, direi, e di teoria politica internazionale e di studio, appunto, della teoria politica democratica, e fa un po' il punto, come altri testi in questo periodo, sulla situazione attuale, e lo fa proprio a partire dal tema della democrazia, dello Stato della democrazia, rilevando appunto come un deficit di democrazia sia dentro l'attuale crisi, che è una crisi che il libro legge appunto nella relazione difficile tra territorialità, diciamo, e dematerializzazione delle relazioni, dematerializzazione della politica, e nel rapporto difficile con una questione che è al centro non solo di questo tipo di studi, ma anche degli studi filosofici, degli studi politici, quello del rapporto col tempo e con lo spazio, che mi sembra che siano due coordinate fondamentali del libro. A questo punto io lascio la parola a Chiara Ferretti per una presentazione più esaustiva e poi faremo altre domande successivamente.
Allora, sì, non credo ci sia bisogno del microfono, cercherò di parlare brevemente e ad alta voce. Come riportato dal collega, il professor Zielonka, diciamo, ha un curriculum sicuramente eccellente. Tra l'altro è stato eletto membro dell'Accademia Europea per la Scienza nel 2018, ma oggi volevo presentarla a voi con una definizione che lui stesso si dà in una prefazione del precedente libro Controrivoluzione. La definizione che si dà è provocatore intellettuale, cioè quello che il professor Zielonka ci mostra e la discussione che ci offre è una riflessione sulla democrazia, su come stia cambiando la democrazia, su come stiano cambiando le categorie che noi adottiamo solitamente quando parliamo di democrazia. Nella prefazione italiana al libro Controrivoluzione, già citato dal collega precedentemente, c'è un attacco all'elite. Il professore si chiede come sia possibile che siamo arrivati alla caduta del liberalismo come progetto e alla crescita spropositata di movimenti populisti. Il populismo, ci dice Zielonka, cresce e vince in qualche modo perché i liberali hanno screditato il loro progetto. L'aumento delle diseguaglianze, l'aumento dei tagli alla spesa pubblica e al welfare, la maggiore evasione fiscale che troviamo in quasi tutti i paesi europei. Sono temi che vengono poi ripresi nel dibattito di oggi, del libro di oggi, Democrazia miope. Democrazia miope. In inglese il titolo, se volete, anche più affascinante, The Lost Future and How to Reclaim It. Quindi c'è una visione in qualche modo speranzosa rispetto al futuro. In Democrazia miope, Zielonka fa un attacco all'idea della democrazia confinata all'interno dell'idea dello Stato-nazione. Quindi si parla di confini, si parla di spazio, si parla di tempo, si parla di caduta dei confini e della nascita di nuovi confini, la costruzione di muri. Il confine delimita un territorio dove lo Stato-nazione ha avuto ed ha legittimità, ma il confine delimita anche le identità e ci troviamo qui davanti ad un primo problema della società contemporanea, l'identità multiple. Oggi, attraverso i social media, con i social media, attraverso la connessione e l'interconnessione che abbiamo come individui e come istituzioni, ci troviamo davanti a identità multiple di cui risentono anche le istituzioni, in gioco continuo fra locale e globale, tra l'amministrazione locale e l'amministrazione sovranazionale. Zielonka introduce anche il tema, parla del tema della dromocrazia, di questa democrazia in qualche modo condannata alla velocità e del rapporto con il turbocapitalismo, quindi la velocità, il tempo che diventa sempre più immediato, un tempo che però non è percepito dai politici, che sono incapaci di reagire in questo tempo accelerato. I politici risultano essere inefficaci e la velocità porta anche a quello che è lo screditamento del ruolo del Parlamento. Lo sappiamo tutti, i governi oggi hanno sempre maggiore importanza perché sono i governi a prendere decisioni che devono essere prese in velocità. E questo crea ovviamente uno scollamento con il concetto di democrazia parlamentare rappresentativa che abbiamo sempre conosciuto. Dicevo, confini cadono, confini nascono. La storia può essere riscritta. Il professor Zielonka lo introduce in alcuni passaggi quando parla soprattutto delle democrazie, o meglio, dei regimi autoritari, le democrazie non sono. La storia può essere riscritta, ma anche nelle democrazie abbiamo assistito alla cancel culture, diciamo, alla nascita della cancel culture. Il problema di fondo all'interno del libro è l'assenza di visioni a lungo termine e di responsabilità, di presa di responsabilità verso le generazioni future. Sicuramente il libro fa emergere una cosa: la storia della democrazia occidentale non è assolutamente finita, ma forse dovremmo iniziare a pensarla attraverso lenti diverse, attraverso categorie e attori, reti di attori sicuramente diverse. Lascio la parola al nostro ospite, che ringrazio per aver accettato l'invito.
Dato tornare a questo dipartimento più importante in Italia di scienze politiche. Come sapete, a Venezia, dove sono adesso, non c'è nemmeno un dipartimento di scienze politiche. Dipartimento di macroeconomisti, statistici. Un problema difficile trovare parola comune, perché io non ho studiato mai la statistica. Adesso non puoi essere dottore di scienza politica senza studiare la statistica, per buoni e cattivi. Però il sommario dei miei libri è abbastanza perfetto, e dunque se avete più interesse potete leggerli. Io ho pensato oggi che parlo più di me come persona intellettuale, come sono arrivato a queste idee. Vi raccomando di chiedere gli altri colleghi in questo serie, grandi persone, più grandi di me, di chiedere il loro progetto di sviluppo, perché tutto parte deve finire. Ma prima di fare questa storia dobbiamo incidere sulla lingua, perché abbiamo concordato che forse è meglio che faccia l'intervento iniziale nell'inglese che non nella mia lingua nata. E così questa tortura per voi di ascoltare il mio italiano sarà meno pesante, perché non presuppongo che tutti siete sadomasochisti. Ma come volete, se per voi non fa differenza quando comincio l'inglese, Parlo inglese, se preferite che parlo in italiano povero. Io non ho niente talento linguistico, questa è la mia quarta lingua. Dunque, potete immaginare che sono in stato ordinare la carbonara, ma parlare di cose più complicate. Cosa volete? Continuare in italiano o inglese? Inglese? Sì, sì, certo.
Poi lo potrebbero fare
Okay. You see, I'm always a little bit amused when I'm presented as a provocateur. Nothing to be ashamed. I remember beautiful video of the Salvatore Dali. Yes, we provocateur, yeah? But of course, I'm not in this league. And each time they say that, properly, they usually mean, okay, it's interesting, but you know, it's not very realistic. It's like on one of the caricatures which my American publisher vetoed. You know, in the Italian edition, there are no caricatures, but in the English editions are caricatures made by me. The problem was, because I thought the argument is pretty heavy, so let's make it a bit more easy by making a lot of references to pop music, literature, film music, but I also included some caricatures. But the last one didn't work very well, because in America, you cannot make jokes about most of the topics. So the most funny caricatures, they basically censored. And one of those was more or less in the spirit why, you know, provocateur. There's a Moses presenting 10 commandments to the crowd. And in the back, there are two guys talking to each other. It's a very interesting program, but not very realistic. So when people say that I'm provocateur, we basically say, well, it's very interesting. You know, interesting in English means of not much value. And the English say to you, the English professor said to the student, oh, it's very interesting, means that they really think it's nothing. So it's very interesting, but not realistic enough. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you, I'm no provocateur whatsoever. What I try to say is a package of ideas, which were so obvious to everybody except those who take part in the political discourse of today, you know, that they find it very provocative. I mean, take the ideas that networks are now the most dominant actors in social life. I mean, Emmanuel Castells wrote a book, you know, trying to learn what is the implications of the Internet revolution 30 years ago about this. And he's considered by media studies as a passé, as an old-fashioned. And we still have to discover this in political science, you know. And still, you know, if you want to get a chair, a proper chair in political science, you have to be a specialist of party system. Party system? I mean, what is it? You know, not to mention that most of the parties try to call themselves by different names. You know, and only later they put it just party when the experiment doesn't work. I'm not going to mention the names, but you know, from Macron to bring up the standard set of ordinary party. We can talk about it later. So you see, I don't say revolutionary. And yet, it sounds like these 10 commandments that, you know, to demand from people don't kill. Sounds revolutionary. Think about the word revolution. It's not revolutionary that you ask people don't kill. Anyway, look, I come from, before in Oxford, I retired. We have obligatory retirement a bit earlier. I'm more than happy to be now in Venice. But you can say I came from the ancient regime of academia, incubator of Tory politicians becoming prime ministers. Look at the quality of these people. You wonder whether Oxford is really an incubator and a quality. But I'm not one of them, despite 20 years working there. Because I would never be accepted as a student there, and I could never afford to be a student there. See, I've grown up in the place you never heard, Silesia, from city, 100,000 inhabitants, place which used to belong to Germany, then was Polish after the war, and I went to schools you never heard of, and had you heard of, you wouldn't like to go there, okay? And I'm not the only one with this background. My good friend, Gregor Eckler, who is Harvard Professor of Government, and was for the last 20 years director of Linda Ginsburg Center for European Studies. He replaced Stan Hoffman. He grown up in even more damn little place, 40 kilometers from where I went to school. So people can, and the great German historian Jürgen Kocher was a little bit more to the side, which is now Czechoslovakia, born up there, and he was the director of VZB, Vicious Zentrum Berlin, for many years. It's the most post-German institution. So if you come from the damn small place, don't worry, so to speak. But my story was different from the others, that this was the place which was really behind the Iron Curtain. And democracy, about which I write a lot, and the European integration, about which I wrote earlier. These were forbidden fruits. We didn't think we can ever reach this. And I was one, when I was your age, I was one of those who believed that let's try to change this paradigm, that those behind Iron Curtain always belong to those with the Kalashnikovs. And as you know, the history proved us right. The only thing that several years later, so when the repression was introduced in Poland, I was just a fresh post, defended my PhD and appointed as a lecturer at the University of Warsaw. When the repression came, I fled the country, which explains you why I'm not really Polish by Dutch, because the only passport I have is Dutch. And the Dutch were very generous to me, not only gave me the job, first in the University of Groningen and then Leiden, but also gave me very quickly passport. The Queen grants passport, and she gave me passport after 5 years, which allows me to travel and so on. I traveled before because I was, at the time, Solidarność, which was crushed, established the center of representation in Brussels. And I didn't join the center, but I was their representative in the United Nations Commission of Human Rights and the Helsinki process. You may not know what Helsinki process is unless you study international relations, but these were the 4-hour democracy and human rights were discussed. Not always in the perfect way. I remember in the Committee of Human Rights in Geneva at the time, the chairmanship was in the hands of such a champion of democracy and human rights like Libya. So you can imagine, I learned realpolitik at the time too. So I was a believer, so to speak, yeah, not even a student of politics, because to study politics in Communist Poland, you have to belong to the regime or so. I studied law, Roman law, really, and civil law, because it was not political. And then when I did PhD, I did it in history of political ideas. But while in Holland, I started to study international relations and politics. Any students of international relations? No, you're all politics. Yeah? So at the time, I had to learn basic American. There were no electronic resources at the time. Let's put it this way. And the literature depended on the libraries. And then I moved to the Europe. From Leiden, I got a chair in Florence at the European University Institute, where I worked nearly a decade, and then they offered me a chair in Oxford. So, and throughout all this time, I always not only studied books, but also talked to politicians. I always thought, it started when I was Solidarity representative, because in the first 2 years, we were very much involved. For politicians to make a picture with us was, advantageous. Only never joined parties, stayed outside party politics, and in part because exactly, if you ask me where I'm from, it's very difficult to say where I'm from. I'm Polish, and I'm Dutch, and I'm Italian, and actually lived here since '96. Even when I was paying taxes in Britain, I continue to have a place, small place, because I'm still. Now I'm basically returned to my village near Chicago, which you may know from the Cameroon, because the youth during the flight was going exactly to those fields there, and the capture was exactly the Chicago man. So it is not only the current coach of the Azuris, it is from Chicago. By the way, I met a number of cases because before the, he had, when he was in sabbatical, he was having wine plantations very close by and going to the same pizzerias as I did. So this is what I am. And to make things even complicated, my wife for 7 years worked in Sydney, Australia. And I commuted a lot, as you can imagine. And since I always had to find somebody to pay for my tickets, I made a lot of stopovers in Asia Pacific, which since then I've taken away. And just to top up to my first. Okay. So therefore, although I always wrote on Europe, I always had more global view on things, which in the last book you can see, but not in the previous, because you have to stick to things you really know well. Okay. But why I gave you this whole introduction? Because what the introduction didn't say is that somebody who reads my book may think that I am actually on a secret page of the Confucius Institute. Because I complain about democracy so much that this is getting very suspicious, you know? This is getting... So let me tell you, I'm not on the pay of Confucius Institute, and I never had with them anything to do, except actually in Sydney, where a friend of mine invited Dalai Lama to give a talk at the University of Sydney. And of course, one telephone of the Chinese embassy to the vice president of the university telling all the Chinese students will leave University of Sydney tomorrow, which would mean bankruptcy of the university. There were so many of them. Made the vice chancellor ban the lecture of Dalai Lama. We then leaked this to Guardian, Australia Guardian. Then students went to demonstrate against violations of freedom of speech. Then Chinese students went demonstrate against liberal students. Then there were big mess on the campus. The vice chancellor went on sabbatical, disappeared, stopped taking instruments. Now the compromise was found. The Dalai Lama gave a speech just behind the walls of the university campus. So can you imagine? By the way, he didn't mention politics in one word, you know, we just talked about it. But this was the only basically, I've been to China many times, but the only encounter with Confucius Institute, which was paying those fellowships for Chinese students there. These days, in big universities, particularly in Australia and Canada, which tells you something about intellectual freedom. But I'm really, and you may say it's personal, very disappointed in which democracy goes. And things are not getting better. And I would like to suggest to you that this is not one of the hiccups, you know, because we used to say democracy is always in crisis. And democracy, it may be bad and messy, but there's nothing better than democracy. Yeah? I still don't believe that autocracy is better. But I don't think that this makes it any easier. Because I'm not interested in autocracies and how they organize their life and go themselves from crisis to crisis, if only because they suppress information, discussions, and therefore, you know, we can come back to this later. They can make quick decisions without political kind of deadlocks, but quick decision is not always wise decision, right? So I'm not convinced that China in the end will prevail in this global competition. In fact, if you talk to Chinese leaders, they don't know how they arrived to situations of such a powers today. The only argument they give you, you know, oh yeah, we were always for 200 years, you know, break of our imperial status. This is nothing in the long run of political history. They don't know how they arrived there. They don't know. They are not sure they will survive tomorrow. And they don't think they have an export product. It tells you something. The Soviet system believed it will be forever, by the way, like liberals. And they thought that they have universal product, which could be, you know, basically sold like a detergent from Africa you know, to Asia Pacific, you know, with, you know, not necessarily liberals, by the way, have the same class. We can have a liberal democracy from Afghanistan. But I don't want to make comparisons because the comparisons are totally misguided, but I just want to emphasize that there is no trust of Chinese that they have universal model. And this is not justifying their policies, but I believe that we should first look at ourselves. And each time we approach problems, we should first look to the mirror. And therefore, in my book Counter-Revolution, I was very proud to negotiate with my publisher to have a verse from Bob Dylan's song, How Good Am I? It's not easy to get copyrights from Bob Dylan songs, I can tell you. But they reached to the pocket and they agreed that this on this, which didn't happen with my last book, which was different publishers, not Oxford, but Yale, who said, no, 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 you cannot cite any pop songs because copyrights, they will sue us all over the world. This is how it is in publishing. Okay. So I'm systematically disappointed in which democracy work on 3 grounds. These are the pillars of democracy: participation, representation, and effectiveness. Why effectiveness? Because citizens expect from democracy not just to be represented, but to sort out the problems they face. Very simple. And if democracy doesn't sort out problems they face, there is a problem. You know, there are these very ugly words, you know, introduced first in European studies, you know, input and output legitimacy. Input legitimacy, exactly, participation. Output legitimacy, system effect. And I think we spoke badly on all. And what is worse, we have no idea how to get out of this. No idea whatsoever. And we stop making any changes, any reform. I always say the things, look at the internet. The topic of my last book is largely about the internet. I mean, look at business firms, how they adjusted to the digital era. Look at newspapers, how they adjusted to digital era, yeah? And mention any democratic reforms which notice that there is something like internet. The only experiments, as I know, is the, you know, Cinque Stelle, you know, kind of direct polling, and you know, with which results, not very successful, but at least they try. There is a problem. We abandoned any effort. And I basically believe that the problems we face cannot be addressed by traditional measures, which you get as students of politics, as instruments of improving democracy, like electoral system. I mean, political parties, they discuss nothing else but the electoral system. They think they will change, you know, from more majoritarian to more proportional, or they manipulate electoral geography, you know, and they always think that they will heal democracy, everything will be fine. Eh? Or they change from presidential to parliamentary system. You have example in Italy. They cannot the problems we face cannot be solved without them. And the situations we arrive in democratic countries basically break the fundamental principle of democracy, without which democracy cannot function. That the electoral losers accept results of electoral winning. And I'm not principally talking about Trump insurrection, which was followed by Bolsonaro and others, they can say, because it doesn't claim to be champion of democracy like America and mother of it. But I'm talking, for instance, about current situation in Poland, where you have different offices, parallel offices of power, rejecting decisions of the other. I mean, in this case, the president, parliament, the constitution. And, you know, the Poles hate it when I say that. The last time we had it, it was in Yeltsin, Russia, 91, 93, and you know how it ended. Yeltsin in the end sent tanks on parliament in Moscow, destroyed them. They arrested this bundle of parliament, he adopted new constitution, surprise, surprise, giving himself all the powers, which now are inherited by nice guy Vladimir Putin. This is serious. Now, but I'm not a politician to run on the barricade with one political slogan to make it fit. I'm trying to understand, as a scholar, and as I hope within yourself, how come did we arrive in this situation? Particularly the young people. How come that on demonstration of the financial crisis in Madrid, there were these banners of students with a scotch in the face, basically saying I have a vote, but I don't have a vote. And here you start with issues which I think Colin Crouch, my colleague and friend, would be talking a lot. He wrote on post-democracy a lot. And my late friend, Peter Meyer, even more as far as parties, for instance, are concerned. With the basic crisis of representation and participation. I understand that these days, Giovanni Sartori is not longer a guru for your generation, but for my generation, he was still a great authority, and he always emphasized democracy ought to be participatory in the first place. There is a caveat which Robert Dahl pointed out to him already in the 1990s, is that the best participation you can have when the government is close to you, in a local level, or in a small state. This is the idea of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So, and this is democracy is small. But those small units do not have enough ability to provide system effectiveness. And Dahl wrote beautiful essay in 93 around the Danish referendum about the Maastricht Treaty, and people were hesitating to vote for Maastricht Treaty, giving more powers to Brussels. And Dahl wrote, right, the government in Denmark is much closer to the people than government in Brussels, for obvious reasons. I don't have to explain it. But it is not enough to have a government which is really representative and offers you means of participation, which you never offered, yeah? Maybe they bought you already some tickets to Brussels for some conferences, but they offered you means of participation. No, they cannot do the things the small units for participating. But you can do what the small units cannot do. To discipline international financial markets, big firms, to do things for which scale matters, right? Because not enough to be, represented. You have to solve citizens' problems. I will come back to this in a second. So in this book, Counter-Revolution, I try to understand how come something I was striving for, which is liberal democracy, went under. And I didn't even use the word populism because populism was always derogatory. You wanted to insult somebody and said he's populist. But democracy by its nature is somehow populist because you rely on as many votes as you can get. Yeah. But it was certainly anti-liberal. So my main argument was that liberalism, which used to be ideology of the subjects against those in power, transformed itself into ideology of power. When fathers of liberalism were writing first books, they were trying to carve the power, absolute power of the king. But for last 3 or 4 decades, parties which were liberal, which is center-left, center-right, it's different names for different parties, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and change. Each party have different. I had once argument with Fritz Bockenstein, who was the leader of the Liberal Party in Holland, who said, "Oh yeah, only these are not Social Democrats or Christian Democrats are not liberal." No. Embrace all the liberal principles without calling themselves liberal party. So all these parties basically defended the status quo. What ideology is in essence? It is to tell you what is right and what is wrong. Ideology defines normality. What is normal and what is the aberration? And those counter-revolutionary, those against liberal idea, they try to reverse it. They try to write their own history, proclaim the new heroes and abandon the old ones, to attack all the pillars of liberal order, like integrations, like open borders, like multiculturalism. Yeah? And the assault goes on, which is witnessed by all the history wars, by all struggles about monuments. You didn't have much of this in Italy, but I can tell you in Britain, in America, the war on monuments, it was a principal war. So the counter-revolution was an ideological challenge to liberalism, which was all-encompassing. They wanted to create a new elite, but they also wanted to create the new definition of good and bad. And they are still doing this. Eh? And the repertoire is very similar. What is in Italy, when I look at Italy from a Polish perspective, which is several years, Italy is several years behind, in this sense, because it is government area in Poland already in 2004. And Viktor Orban is an area. they start with redefining history. Then discussion very close to your history. In Poland, we didn't have fascists in Poland, but in Italy, you know, the discussion is exactly about this. This is the first step you do. Then you do the family life, family politics. In Poland, it started not with abortion, it started with in vitro, where the state should support artificial insemination. And then only went to abortion. And so-called model of the real family. Great politician, not female, but they say. I mean, Papa, Mama, children. You know, reality was always small, including lack of the same politicians with their parents. So this was the challenge. But of course, the challenge, why was the challenge possible? You see, populists were always there. The father of Marine Le Pen got sick in European Parliament, I think, or Assembly, was in the 50s. Then he came second in presidential elections in France. I remember York Hyder in history. But for us, it was like yesterday, York Hyder. You know what is the difference? Prototype of populism. Pim Fortuyn. Remember Pim Fortuyn? Pim Fortuyn was our point. When I was in London, he was professor of economics. Only later moved to politics, later assassinated. You know, what was the difference? That the populists were there. Sometimes they get a little bit more votes, sometimes a little bit less. Able to form a government. So my principal questions in the book Counter-Revolution is not what they are doing. There were a lot of good books on populism by my colleagues, Kasmude or Jan Werner Müller, and so Kasmude was my colleague in Leiden, and Jan Werner was in Oxford. I actually inherited his office. But I'm not interested in populism. My question was, how come the voters who supported liberal center-left and center-right party across Europe said, enough. How come? And here the story of what Colin would tell you, Colin Proud, in 2 weeks, I suppose, is very important because he pointed very well to major problem of representation, participation, and how democracy somehow became hollow. And I don't want to look. No, you only have to attribute personal responsibility to each one, which politicians are. Because I believe these were never easy decisions, yeah? Take, for instance, the excessive power of non-majoritarian institutions, something which was challenged by populism. Why? Why? Because we delegated more powers to central banks, to constitutional courts, to the European Commission, and we basically created a situation that we vote for a party, they come to power, and they cannot do anything. Because there is European Commission doesn't like you, because there is some regulatory agency, or because there is, you know, but there were good reasons to do this. we gave powers to central banks because we didn't want politicians each time elections are coming, basically bribing the electorate and taking debts for which the future generation has to pay. We gave more power to constitutional courts. Why? Because we didn't want the parliament of the day, which sometimes won with 1 or 2%, with other parties, to totally revolutionary political or constitutional arrangements. No, we give those power to constitutional court, which required, government of the day to observe constitutional rules like rights of man. So the reasons were good. There were good reasons to give more powers to the European Union because you cannot delegate tasks to European Union without giving them any powers. And then everybody is doing free riding, yeah? Which translated in English, plain English, is cheating. Eh? So there were good reasons to do that. And I don't want to blame politicians X or Y. I just say that things went too far, because if you give so much power to those non-elected institutions, then elections really do not matter. Then you shouldn't be surprised that we was leader of five-star movement. Now we have a government. Then we have government of Draghi, which is I don't know which bank he is basically coming from. Now we have government of Meloni. Can you show me difference in their policy towards financial market? Raise the hand if you can. If you can give major difference between these three totally different governments concerning financial market. Not easy, eh? So you can say the capitalism a long time ago, but I think it's too simple to say that. Yeah? You can say that Draghi certainly tried to 110 and trying to cut 110 not in parliament but to banking regulations for other dubious policy. I know it very well because I was installing photovoltaic in my house, so I know. But these are minor issues. So of course, if you can't change the government and you cannot change policies, there is a problem. And the problem is either ideological, because you believe there is no alternative, because all alternatives are stupid, absurd. Power to do anything because power were taken somewhere else. And there is no doubt that neoliberalism, with its deregulations and privatizations, obsessive ones, deprive the state economic instruments to do what the state is about to do. But I haven't seen any government trying to face the markets. In fact, the last government there are two governments who tried to face the market, in my memory. Yeah? One was Mitterrand, beginning 80s, 98. It took the markets around 10 months for Mitterrand to change the policies 80%, yeah? To reverse all the reforms which were challenging the British. Liz Truss, This you may follow. When Liz Truss announced her policies to challenge financial markets, it took how many months, days to remove Liz Truss? 6 or 7. Who's Liz Truss? She was elected by Parliament, the mother of Parliament, Westminster. The most democratic way, 6, 7 months. Eh? So this is what my book Counter-Revolution was about. And this was largely thanks to political parties which no longer provided the but which became really self-perpetuating machinery of meritocracy selection. Peter Meyer writes beautifully about this. Ruling the Void, I suggest you to read. It's only Peter is no longer does because he should be serious. And we have parties which have less and less members and more parties. And running and participation in the very work. What the supermarkets consumers, you get those questions very often on your mobile. Do you prefer a yellow? Yeah, I'm simplifying. Do you prefer a yellow or pink color of soap this year? People, when they are puzzled by the question pink or yellow, one difficult question is, oh, pink. So the majority say pink, they say you pink. So more or less they do the same with political products. Do you want them? They misjudge very often because, for instance, most of politicians are obsessed with migration. But even the large opinion polls show you that migration is not number one, the topic. Yeah, so there is not only that they blindly follow the obsessions with opinion polls. Don't ask me what I think about methodology. But the most prestigious television programs to show you know, yes, a few days ago, I've seen a beautiful headline. After the press conference of Mrs. Meloni, the center-right got half a point post in the polls. What is this? What is this? How many people really watch this? I don't know. When I observe the discourse, I don't know whether this is tragic or comic. But all this is done by most of my colleagues, and they did it much better than I. To summarize these things and maybe put representation and participation in crisis, you know, they did it much better. And you see this in, you know, I'm not going to ask you how many of you are party members, but I know opinion polls which tells you how many people have trust in governments, how many people. My favorite poll, which I think cite in this book, is that majority in one poll showed the majority of people polled would give more powers to artificial intelligence with access to our data than to members of parliament. It tells you something. Yeah? But this is the stuff which is well researched. And I recently reviewed 3 books. Stained by Carlo and Paul Tyler and by Fukuyama. And they all write about this. We have to come back to the civil society and get rid of those parties. Okay, we have to, to get grip over the markets. Okay, we have to reintroduce the real rule of law. And I frankly think that this is water under the bridge. This is nostalgia for the old world, which is no longer there. I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think. Because I believe that you can come to the classical model, political participation, as we took from the classical books. I just don't see this possible. And the reason I think is exactly what I wrote in the second book. Why this is the water under the bridge? Because the two features of democracy, and I will finish here, which we knew from the start and we could cope with, are no longer sustainable in the ever more connected world running under the ever higher speed. What are those features, which I call is short-sighted in terms of space because it's constrained to the borders of the nation state. There's no democracy outside nation state. EU tries to imitate the state of doing the state art, and so, but with very mixed results. And nobody expects democracy from firms. Expect democracy to be firms to be transparent, accountable to shareholders, not democratic. Democracy is nation state, right? But most of the problems which citizens encounter either local or transnational. Local, where to study, where to work, where to find a place, how to commute between work and your house, where to put your children to the crèche, where to put your mother to the hospital. Is it the state or the city which is here principal? And when you think about issues like climate change, like pensions, which are all in investments, global investments, pension funds, all in stock. When you think about peace and war, it's all transnational issues, which again, nation states is increasingly unable. The problem is that the nation states claim monopoly on power and resources. And it claims even more than ever. And in fact, this is what people seem to want. Because most of elections in Europe recently were won by so-called sovranisti. Beautiful Italian word within English, sovereignist is awkward. So you introduce another very trendy buzzword, in dictionary of political science. So it's not only Romans thing. Sovranisti, what do they want? They want power back. They don't only want power back from Brussels. They want power back also from the cities and regions. And, they even criminalize NGOs these days, If you are part of So there is this paradox that the less states states are able to address those issues, the more power they claim. And they claim it on big by profiting on nostalgia. They don't have idea how to change the future, so they go to discuss the past, to invent the glorious history, and this is the bonds of nation, you know, the bonds of the family. These are the things, you know, which they merge together, and the Christianity in case of Europe, you know, and these are the bonds which are forever lasted, and therefore we should stick to this because this is the only, you know, and it's getting tautological because, you know, this stop democratic. Thank you very much. There is a problem here. But this is not the end, because democracy is also myopic in terms of time. Why? Because it's a prisoner of the common current day voters. You know, politicians like to make pictures always in elections with babies and say families, we probably, you know, we stand for future, but when it comes to tough decisions, people like me with gray hairs or no hairs are always winning. Partly because of demography, and partly because those, for instance, who really will take, you know, heat from climate change. And this was all manageable when the world was less interconnected and moving on. The most important. Why? Because as my former student in his beautiful book, Friedman wrote, internet made the word flat, basically. I mean, you know, I live now in Venice. I know Marco Polo. We are all going to celebrate Marco Polo these days. We know he could trade all over the world, but not in a fraction of a second. And as I said, the businesses, even criminals, adjusted to this word, but democracy hasn't. Democracy now is either paralyzed or trying to cultivate those myths of, you know, of a national glory. I grew up in a very national country. As a boy, I got my nationalistic education. But you know, I always said to my friends in Poland, and I can tell you here in Italy too, that you in Italy have a different view of the nation than the Polish, prototype of nationalism. I said, if the nation is so great, why we are so helplessly divided? Why we're not able to talk to each other on the political divide? And the same in America. Look at America. If America is a nation of new invention, not European or type, but multicultural, is so great, why these people cannot agree on anything? You know, it's one thing, you know, I know that the Italians are more concerned whether Azzurri win next football cup, but and not in those other things because regional identities are very strong. But what I want to say is that this is all fine. I take identities very serious, but I know that there are other identities, gender, it's a class, and you can go on with various identities, which are being undermined, and nation is exactly trying to say that only the nation is the real one, yeah, and superior one, and others should be subjected to this. But there is the mixture, the fusions of the nation and the state. And even the European Union, which is the most integrated organizations we have in democracy, leaders of nation states go to Brussels to bargain their national interest. And of course, because they represent the electorate. This is what they are supposed to do. The problem is that they end up either with deadlock, and most likely these days, because the goal is no longer with us, you know, they end up with the lowest common denominator, which is wishy-washy solutions which doesn't solve anything. Yeah? How many environmental pledges we have in recent years? I cannot count anymore. How many times we heard that we should have a healthy migratory policies? How many times we said we should be surrounded by axis of friends, prosperous countries? Well, show me that. And this is not that we, and most of these things happen with our participation. And not just negligence, active participation. Because when I, for instance, take migration, you know, what was European migratory policy over recently? We cut on development aid. We cut on investments in all these poor, unstable countries. And when we had development aid, we made sure that most of this money comes back to our capital. We sided with all dictators all over to keep migrants out, bribe them with a lot of money, you know, to keep them, whether it was Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, wherever. Then we bombed some of those countries, and then we left them to local warriors. Yeah. Then we were surprised with migrants. I mean, it's not only immoral what we do, it's just utterly counterproductive and inefficient. And why? Because migration is a very good example. To do effective migratory policies, you need first to address the roots of migrations, because you cannot do it on border. But of course, obsessions with border, you know, first myopia, doesn't make you think about addressing the root of migration, because this is what is the root of migration: poverty, war, climate change. And to do this, you have to do it over many years, because you don't eliminate, you know, a poverty by decree or one shipment of cash. You have to do it for many years, and you have to do it in concert. Well, but our democracies are unable to do this. So they will send more ships, you know, on the Mediterranean to chase traffickers and NGOs. They will build more walls than they've been so far. You know, there are statistics showing that we built in Europe more walls after the fall of Berlin Wall than ever in this century, in the previous century. And it will not work at all. And by applying barbarian methods like the Poles applied against refugees on the border with Belarus, you know, I was attacked there because I said, if you act like barbarian, you end up to be barbarian. You know the American joke, you know, if you talk like a duck, walk like a duck, and look like a duck, you have to be a duck. And you know, and we ended up with this. We ended up with policies which are not just barbaric, which are absolutely inefficient and will never be efficient. And they can, of course, you know, as you can, of course, pay a lot of money to Erdogan and keep those people there. But think about each time he has some problems, he asks for more. And think how many compromises we made with Erdogan because we were hostage of this deal. I'm not even talking about much less important players like Tunisia, which, by the way, after Arab Spring was the only democracy surviving. And when I was there and asked what Europeans are doing, they said, helping democracy? No, they're only interested in keeping migrants out of our land. So Tunisia is now autocracy too. Congratulations. So much about prime European policy of democracy and human rights promotion. The only country which was democracy in there is now autocracy. Okay. I say those things to just illustrate to you that the problem is not just theoretical. The decisions we made to maintain certain model of democracy have a lot of practical implications on all the fields we are debating. But you have, if you look at the distance with this is the systematic problem and not the problem of this party. And we all have our favorite politicians, indulge with them. But I fear that even if those who we believe can deliver, get into power, we will be disappointed because they are victims of the arrangements we are in and cannot escape. And it is not easy to get out of this, because if you make out of beautiful democratic aquarium a fish soup, it's very difficult to get back. Then we can discuss what to do about it. But this is where we are. We made a fish soup out of democratic. And unless we accept the proposition, we will be applying measures which are not bringing us anywhere forward. Electorates will be, supporting ever new people who are not tied to the government anymore, and it will be the vicious circle. And I'm old enough to worry, but I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Domande?
Sì, se ci sono domande ringrazio intanto il professor Scuccimarra e la direttrice che ci ha raggiunto, la professoressa Marchetti. Se domande puoi farle in italiano, tranquillamente. Io ne avrei alcune, ma prego, poi lei. Ti vuoi raggiungere qua perché forse...
Non va nella registrazione poi. No?
Come preferisce?
Vuole raggiungerci qui? Si imbarazza molto.
No.
Sarebbe meglio perché così possiamo finire in una registrazione.
Esatto, ci sto.
From what I've understood of what you said, so correct me if I'm wrong. One of the problems concerning space is that in democracy we can't delegate power. We have to delegate power, but citizens must not be excluded. So if there are issues that can be delegated to totalitarian regimes, that's not the case for democracy. So, for example, when you were talking about European Central Bank or the European Commission. It felt like one of the problems is that citizens are not represented in the decisions. So, in your opinion, how can be this gap filled out of the classical ways of representing liberal democracy? Because you said that there are given answers, but only in this classical frame, which is not working anymore. So if you have maybe solutions for this distance gap, which can be seen either from the bottom of decisions, but also from the top, but also from the bottom, because sometimes the problem is that the citizens think that the problems they can face the problems because they're too huge, or they don't have the means or the power to. So.
Look, in my book, when I quoted, I gave some examples of what journalists usually expect from us, which is, tell me, 1, 2, 3, what can we do about this? And I basically compare it to the books, you buy at the airport, you buy at the airport, you wait for the planes, and you usually have those books, how to become a millionaire in a month, or how to lose 20 kilo in 3 weeks, I don't think it works this way. So you have to work with paradigms more, you see, in the sense that not with a very specific institutional solution, but first to agree on the paradigm and then look for institutional ways of implementing it. And you have to take some risks, because if you never experiment, you never know whether it works. You see, since my British background, I know the saying, it works in theory, but does it work in practice? Although I learned from the French, that's the other way around. The French can tell you, yes, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? So, but what I would say here is the following. The common road is, for instance, why don't we use more e-democracy referenda, for instance? I actually believe that we should open ourselves to more e-democracy, and I still don't understand why in some countries like Poland you cannot have a vote in national elections through the internet. And I think this is because they want to restrict people voting. While in Holland, you just have to register, you have to register much in advance, but it's no problem to vote through the internet. But what I wanted to say is that I don't think this is the main, in my logic, it doesn't lead me to those conclusions, although I would certainly want those who understand how e-democracy works to come up more forcefully with their proposals. But my problem is here, what is the unit of democratic decision making? And I'm not a fan of referenda, because referenda are not only reducing complicated matters to yes and no, but because politics is very often about simplifying complex matter to simple decisions. But my problem with referendum is that the winner takes it all. So referendum basically doesn't encourage dialogue and deliberation. Referendum basically encourages polarization, and the polarization is our, in sociologists can tell you, because there are a lot of studies, our major illness these days in political world. So I don't want to have more polarization, I want to have more dialogue and deliberation, which means that the loser doesn't, doesn't lose everything. When I told you at the beginning that the democracy cannot function if the loser doesn't accept the laws, which is the case today, I gave you examples, is, exactly, because if there is nothing for the loser to, in this game, they're not going to accept the laws. It's very simple. You don't have to be a great philosopher to understand this. So this is why I have problems to go this avenue. What I would rather do is exactly to abolish monopoly of states on decision and resources. I would basically, divide power more between states, local, and transnational bodies, including those you could say are not democratic by nature, like, for instance, NGOs, including business associations. Because you can say, okay, cities or provinces are elected, but NGOs are not elected. But I see their contribution to public goods. I believe that those which are willing and able to contribute to public goods should have greater access to decision and resources. And besides, regardless of my, nickname provocateur, I'm actually not revolutionary here, because I believe you can do those things by gradual way. I work it out when I wrote a book on the EU, how you can change it. I, for instance, said, why don't we have a second chamber of parliament, not as it is often proposed, but by national parliamentarians, which would only reinforce the control of nation state, but by representative, by cities, regions, NGOs, and trade unions, business associations. Why business association? Because I prefer that the business association argue its point in European Parliament than in these restaurants around, Schumann in Brussels. And I know some of those lobbies, I can tell you, they are pretty rich people. So this business pays because there's a lot of money in circulation. So I prefer that they have access to decision and resources, and also with NGOs, because I believe that, when it comes to issues like climate change or eradications of poverty, NGOs are doing the job much better than states. I'm sorry. And if you want to really endorse causes like the eradication of poverty or climate change, would you join the political party? Or would you join the NGO if you would like to change something? I think this is a rhetorical question. So this is how I think, that you have to enlarge the size of democracy in the process. Of course, you can say, oh, how the oversight transparency will work. Well, let's discuss this. First of all, I don't see governments transparent any longer. And I write about this in my last book. Why? Because we have, since financial crisis in Europe, a permanent state of emergency. Because exactly things are moving so quickly that the normal parliamentary procedures do not work. there was nothing in the treaties that the European Commission has any prerogatives in the field of health. But when there was a need to negotiate vaccines, although the Commission negotiated it like potatoes, frankly, didn't know how to do this, but everybody understood that it's better that they do this than we compete with each other with big pharma, you know, and only rich big states will get vaccines and the rest will be in the dark, right? Or when there was a need to get out of economic burdens of COVID, everybody understood that we need to have European level of recovery fund. Otherwise, only Germany will have economic, and they will even become richer than after the financial crisis, you know. So what I want to say is that the idea, you know, we have a WhatsApp. My British colleagues, you know, Jonathan White, who just published an excellent book about time in politics. We have WhatsApp governments in Europe for more than a decade, and they have to do this. You see, you don't want, you know, if there is a crisis, migratory, financial, or war, the governments have to act. This is what people expect from them. And of course, it is not transparent. The New York Times brought an European Parliament actually area, von der Leyen, to court because of her negotiations with Big Pharma. Why? Because she said the European Parliament demanded the record of negotiations, and she said it was all on WhatsApp. And I deleted. But of course she did it like this. There was no time. You know, but this procedure was totally wrong. And this is why New York Times brought her to court. This procedure was totally wrong. But this is a beautiful example how time, space, and politics are out of sync. And to finish, I give you my favorite example, which came after I finished my book. You remember a few months ago, there was this proposal of big artificial intelligence firms to have 6 months moratorium on development of artificial intelligence to give governments time to regulate it. You know, for those firms, 6 months is enormous offer. 6 months in this business, we're talking about solar era. In democracy, the parliamentary committee the rules are abandoned. Nothing happened. You see what I mean? This is the world we are living. So each time you tell me, okay, NGOs are not democratic or transparent, or we have to find other ways to do this. John Keane already long time ago wrote Monetary Democracy book, where he showed that accountability is done by media and NGOs and other actors, basically watching governments, not by the parliament. How many scandals actually were discovered by parliamentarians? By whistleblowers, which the governments try to put behind the bars usually, yeah? I'm going to give you an example.
Giusto per cercare di essere il più chiaro possibile. Mi chiedevo se appunto è necessario riorganizzare a questo punto le istituzioni in modo che le istituzioni locali si occupino effettivamente solo dei problemi locali, mentre quando siamo all'interno dell'Unione Europea, delle istituzioni europee, si vada a creare degli obiettivi europei, non delle, diciamo, come per le estensioni delle volontà nazionali che stanno all'interno dell'Unione Europea, ma delle politiche che siano veramente europee per i cittadini europei.
Ci sono problemi, ma non è così che solo attori locali possono, sono capaci di fare qualcosa bene per problemi locali. Perché, come sai, ci vuole cooperazione da diversi livelli. E questa cooperazione non esiste perché i poteri nelle Nazioni Unite, nell'Unione Europea e nel Stato nazionale sono sempre nelle mani del Stato nazionale. Con spiegazione perché solo noi siamo democratici e tutti gli altri non ci sono. E questo significa che questi altri organi non possono funzionare bene.
Come si può dividere questo interesse che è nazionale dall'interesse che deve essere invece europeo?
Ma non c'è divisione. Guarda, pensa di immigrazione, per esempio. Migrazione è un problema globale, possiamo dire, perché i migranti vengono da Sri Lanka, da Somalia, ma nello stesso punto decisioni sono nazionali, perché solo stati nazionali decidono cosa succede sulla frontiera, qualche volta fanno anche un accordo europeo, ma con partecipazione di tutti, cioè veto di uno Stato, urban o locale tutto. Ma quando questi migranti arrivano in Italia, chi deve trovare lavoro per loro? E anche sicurezza. Stato, Unione Europea, Nazioni Unite, no, città. La città, perché loro finiscono nelle grandi città. E dunque non puoi dire che migrazione è solo locale o solo globale. Queste cose non funzionano così. Ma monopolio di decisioni è nelle mani sempre di Stato. E questo è il problema. E gli Stato non permette Nazioni Unite, oppure nemmeno Unione Europea, di fare tante cose che i cittadini aspettano, possono profittare. E questo è il grande problema. Infatti, guarda, se io guardo nel mondo, che sono aperti per collaborare con Europa, con Nazioni Unite, con le regioni e città, funzionano molto bene. Germania funziona molto meglio perché non sempre, ma di solito è molto più aperta per collaborazione con regioni che hanno i loro poteri, città e anche l'Unione Europea. E ci sono altri, come il governo polacco vecchio, che non voleva lavorare con l'Unione Europea, con Nazioni Unite, con città oppure regione. Il governo deve decidere tutto da sé. E i risultati sono tragici. Dunque, tutti i casi sono diversi, dunque, ma io voglio dire che c'è anche evidente dal punto di vista empirico che se questo funziona si può fare per bene dei cittadini. Ma non si fa, perché infatti di ironia della situazione è che adesso vincono elezioni quelli che dicono troppi poteri sono fuori lo Stato, dobbiamo riconquistare. E questo, secondo me, è disastroso.
Grazie, complimenti in italiano.
Altre domande o osservazioni?
Una domanda più.
Approvato con la via della città. Sì, questa è in realtà una cosa differente, al che poi non è riuscito nel tempo a farlo, tipo un po'.
Non era Conte o Salvini che viaggiava il governo di...
No, il governo
Sì. E io ho capito che il proponente di questo cooperazione con Cina era soprattutto anche Lega, non solo.
sì, era il governo.
Guarda, il problema con Cina puoi volere tante cose, ma prima nessuno sa come si lavora con Cina, perché loro cultura diplomatica è totalmente diversa. Io non dico nel modo negativo solo, perché se ti, per esempio, Cina non ha invaso gli altri paesi dal 79. Io temo che loro hanno potere a diversi posti, ma dobbiamo anche dire, loro infatti non hanno mandato, loro sono, le repressioni sono state soprattutto dentro Cina, di patrimonio, il Tiananmen Square, queste cose, ma se si guarda la storia dei nostri governi, noi abbiamo mandato soldati con giustificazioni peculiari come l'Iraq diverse volte, sì. Dunque, qui dobbiamo essere, dunque, sono diversi non sempre nel modo negativo, spesso negativo. Ma io sono sempre più prudente, ma non possiamo essere sempre più prudenti e bilanciati, perché se vuoi avere privilegi da americani, devi fare le scelte, secondo me. Ma dunque, tutto questo è, diciamo, fa poco da fare con democrazia, fa fare di gioco geostrategico. Naturalmente i governi non chiedono alla loro popolazione dobbiamo insistere su collaborazione con Cina o no. Questo, hai visto nel programma elettorale questo? Hai visto? Dunque, queste cose si tiene fuori e secondo me si tiene fuori per bene, ma anche nel modo geostrategico io non penso che stati nazionali sono così potenti perché abbiamo vissuto in Afghanistan potere militare senza confini, diciamo, America. Abbiamo vissuto come ci sono ritirati da Afghanistan. E anche è chiaro, ma questo non significa che questo, alcuni pensano che questo sono buone notizie. Io non penso che sono buone notizie sempre. Perché, guarda, con potere, io non penso che potere per sé è negativo. Perché senza potere è anche difficile fare qualcosa bene. Dunque tutto questo che io ho detto non è, diciamo, appello anarchistico, che il potere è sempre sbagliato. Di, come si dice, to implementare potere nel modo con consenso dei nostri cittadini e per bene non solo cittadini, ma comunità internazionale. Questo è il mio preoccupazione, e non potere per sé. Perché se non hai potere puoi fare niente bene. Purtroppo il mondo è così. Il potere ti aiuta a fare bene, ma ti aiuta anche a fare male. E per questo noi pensiamo che democrazia è il sistema migliore, perché costringe il potere e chiede quelli nel potere di almeno parlare con cittadini e gli altri prima, forse troppo di chiedere, ma è così. Ma io non voglio fare commento di come il governo Draghi, Conte. Io posso fare se vuoi, ma questo non è il mio punto. Io volevo solo dire che né Conte, né Draghi, né Meloni hanno provato a sfidare mercati internazionali. Questo non si può negare. E questo è interessante, eh?
Se non ci sono altre osservazioni, direi che delle provocazioni comunque sono state lanciate, quindi non fermo.
Non arriverà mai. I filosofici e doppia riflessione, da un lato sul rapporto tra nomadi e stanziali, che in quello tu vedi come si può dire, una costruzione politica dei soggetti, un modo di vivere, una prospettiva appunto di cambiamento. Quindi, in qualche modo sono due modalità diverse, oppure se una in un certo senso in prospettiva potrebbe vivere l'altra. E l'altro è il rapporto che tu poni intorno, la questione che tu poni intorno all'accelerazione, e quindi intorno alla velocità. È una riflessione che mi sembra che sia rimasta un po' sospesa sull'elogio della lentezza. Quindi, il momento in cui se tu questo lo accogli dentro il paradigma della velocità e dell'accelerazione, oppure se anche lì diventano due paradigmi alternativi.
Guarda, io non so che ho capito bene, ma riflessione sul cambiamento. Perché, esatto, perché preferisco riformare il sistema che c'è, provo a trovare il modo di cercare un compromesso. Ma come studente di politica ho imparato che tutto potere è orientato sul status quo, che questi nel potere vogliono tenere cose come sono, perché gli danno privilegi. E per dire la verità, nella storia io ho imparato che potere ci vuole prendere. Nessuno ti ha voluto fare la guerra per i loro diritti. Adesso la comunità LGBT fa lo stesso. Prima i sindacati per diritti di lavoro. Potere si prende. E ci sono poche istanze nella storia dell'umanità quando quelli nel potere hanno deciso, oh ragazzi, questa è una buona idea, allora vi do un po' di potere, capisci? E io dico, va bene, dobbiamo dare più poteri a reti, che sono più flessibili, meno organizzati, burocratici. Ma qualche volta quando io guardo, penso che loro sono dall'altro pianeta, loro non sono interessati nel potere come Stato nazionale. Nessuno nelle città parla di sovranità. Infatti adesso c'è il discorso di sovranità europea di Macron, perché Macron è francese, in Francia sovranità è santa, e per lui Europa è Francia, ma non fa senso, perché infatti qui non si parla di potere nel senso formale, ma qui si parla di potere per essere in stato di fare politica diversa. E dunque, che se vuoi potere, regali, sul tempo è ancora più difficile, perché io non dico va bene, facciamo, si delega tutto all'intelligenza artificiale e loro fanno meno errori, sempre più veloce. No, io non penso che questo è la strada, anche se penso che tante cose tecniche puoi delegare, perché probabilmente io mi fido più di intelligenza artificiale che qualche burocrata nel comune mi chiede tante cose prima di questo dottorato. Sai cosa voglio dire? No, spesso cercarlo perché vivo là, ma non ho male esperienza concertata, ma sapete cosa voglio dire? Ma di cose principali io non posso che possiamo velocizzare per delegazione all'intelligenza artificiale, anche perché se l'intelligenza artificiale è programmata, la domanda è chi ha programmato l'intelligenza artificiale? E se non è programmata, perché si sviluppa indipendente di istruzioni di umani, siamo ancora nel più grande guaio. Dunque, questi sono solo prime. Andiamo a. Io ho citato nel mio libro Roger Brubaker, che ha scritto bellissima cosa sugli aspetti sociali e politiche di intelligenza artificiale. Perché Brubaker? Perché Brubaker è padre di studi di nazionalismo. Dunque, interessante come qualcuno che conosce cultura politica così bene può adesso anche imparare qualcosa su intelligenza artificiale. Perché qui probabilmente aspetto di tempo diventa cruciale. Io non sono capace abbastanza per capire, ma ho l'impressione anche che ingegneri pensano nel modo socioculturale e etico di gestire queste cose. E anche se c'è sempre c'è sempre gestione di denaro. E il denaro qui spinge per accelerare le cose senza riflessione. E anche aspetto geopolitico, perché se guardi la statistica dell'intelligenza artificiale fra 10 più grandi aziende, 7 sono cinesi. Uno tra loro 2 taiwanesi, perché non sono nemmeno, l'altro 3 sono americani.
Grazie, allora, grazie ancora per i commenti e le prove.